I never thought it would come to this. The day I married Jonathan, I thought I was stepping into a future full of love, support, and happiness. We'd been together for over 5 years, and I truly believed we were meant to be. But now, as I sit here looking at everything that's crumbled, I can't help but feel a mix of disbelief and anger. How did we go from being a couple that felt like soulmates to complete strangers? We were both 28 when we got married. I remember how excited we were in the beginning, planning our future, imagining a life where we were always there for each other. Jonathan had always been charming, supportive, and the kind of guy you wanted by your side. At least, that's what I thought. But as time passed, the cracks started to show, though I didn't want to admit it. Small things at first, like him canceling plans last minute, or brushing off my concerns when I wanted to talk. I always told myself it was just a phase, or that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until his mother, Ruth, passed away that things really started falling apart. Ruth and I had always had a good relationship. She was kind and supportive, especially when Jonathan and I had our rough patches. She always told me I was a part of the family, so when she passed, I expected to deal with my grief while also supporting Jonathan. But what happened next changed everything. A few weeks after Ruth's funeral, I received a letter, Ruth's will. She had left me the apartment she owned, a place I had visited often, a place that had always felt like home. Ruth had told me numerous times that I could do what I wanted with it, sell it, keep it, whatever. I never thought much of it. After all, she was family. But when Jonathan found out, his reaction was nothing like what I expected. "You're going to sell the apartment?" he asked, his voice sharp, his eyes narrowing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if he had suddenly become a different person. "That's not what I want," he continued, barely containing his frustration. "We need that money." I froze, unsure of how to respond. The apartment was mine, but Jonathan couldn't see it that way. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was about what he thought we needed and what he wanted to take from me. "I don't need the money," I said quietly. "I need space. I need freedom." Jonathan didn't see it that way. "We need it for the future," he insisted, his face flushed with anger. I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time in months. "What future, Jonathan? You've been too busy with your own things to see what's going on with me." I wasn't asking for much, just for him to take a moment, look at me, and realize that I was falling apart. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, Jonathan had stopped being the person I married. He had become someone who only cared about what I could provide for him. All the late-night work calls, all the empty promises, all the moments when I was left alone to deal with everything, he didn't notice any of it. He didn't care. And when I finally started to stand up for myself, he didn't like it. The argument escalated quickly. I told him I was going to sell the apartment, that I needed to move on with my life. I couldn't stay in a place that reminded me of everything that had gone wrong. But Jonathan didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to lose control over something that he thought was his. It wasn't just the apartment that was at stake. It was his hold over me, over my life. "You're abandoning me," he said, his voice low and accusing. "You're abandoning everything we built." I felt the weight of his words, but at the same time I felt a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't abandoning him. I was saving myself. I had been holding on to a relationship that had long stopped serving me, and I couldn't keep doing it. It wasn't love anymore. It was fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of being alone. Fear of facing the truth. But in that moment, I realized that the fear was worse than the reality. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living in this cycle of resentment and disappointment. Jonathan was no longer the person I had married. He was someone else, and I had been too afraid to see it. I thought back to all the times I had tried to reach out to him, to get him to talk, to tell me what was really going on in his head. But every time I did, he shut me out. I wasn't enough for him, and it was clear now that I had never been enough. Maybe I had spent too much time trying to make things work, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. And so, with a heavy heart, I made my decision. I would sell the apartment, and I would start over. I would no longer live in the shadow of a marriage that had died long ago. Jonathan could continue down his path, whatever that was, but I was done. It wasn't easy, and it didn't feel like a victory, but it was the only way forward. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to let go. And that was the hardest thing I had ever done. The weeks that followed were a blur. I was no longer sure who I was in this marriage. Every day felt like I was living someone else's life, just going through the motions, trying to keep things together on the surface while everything inside me was falling apart. Jonathan and I barely spoke to each other. The space between us grew wider, and the silence grew louder. I'd always been someone who gave everything to my relationships, whether it was family, friends, or my partner. I gave them my time, my trust, my love. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. I had spent so much time trying to make Jonathan happy, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, that I forgot to take care of myself. I was pouring from an empty cup, and it had drained me completely. It wasn't just the apartment or the money. It was everything. The way Jonathan had stopped seeing me, the way he couldn't even remember the last time he told me he loved me without it feeling forced. The arguments over the smallest things, the way he would dismiss my feelings, telling me I was being dramatic. I had become the villain in my own story, and he had become the hero in his. But the final straw came when I found out something I should have known a long time ago. One evening, after I had come home late from work, I noticed Jonathan sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. It wasn't unusual for him to be on his phone, but tonight, something felt off. He was scrolling quickly, almost nervously, and I could hear him muttering under his breath. I walked in and asked, "Who are you texting?" He jumped, like I had caught him doing something wrong. "It's nothing," he said quickly, shoving his phone into his pocket. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, of fear, that I couldn't ignore. I had never been the type to snoop. I trusted Jonathan, or at least I thought I did. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't go looking for trouble, but trouble found me anyway. The next morning, as Jonathan was in the shower, I grabbed his phone. It felt wrong, but I couldn't help myself. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. What I found made my stomach churn. It wasn't one text. It wasn't even a handful. There were dozens of messages. Messages between Jonathan and a woman I didn't recognize. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Maybe it was just a work colleague or a friend he hadn't mentioned. But then I saw the photos, the flirtation, the intimacy. My heart sank. This wasn't just a friendship. This was something more. And as I read through the messages, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Jonathan had been cheating on me. It wasn't the first time I'd felt something was off, but it was the first time I had hard evidence that shattered everything I thought I knew. The man I had married, the man I had loved with everything I had been lying to me for months. I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. My mind raced, but there was one thing I knew for sure. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had been dreading. I had finally been handed the truth, and there was no going back. When Jonathan got out of the shower, I didn't waste any time. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't give him the chance to lie his way out of it. I confronted him immediately. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice cold, but my heart was anything but. "Who are you texting, Jonathan? Don't lie to me." He froze. His eyes widened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine fear in his face. It was like the mask he had been wearing all this time had slipped, and there was no pretending anymore. I can explain," he stammered. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to hear anything that could make this better. There was no fixing this, no coming back from it. The trust was gone, and so was my patience. "Explain?" I scoffed. "You've been sleeping with someone else, Jonathan. Do you think there's anything you could say that would make this okay?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. I didn't want to hear his lies. I had heard enough. "I want you out," I said firmly. "Now." Jonathan's face fell. "You don't mean that," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We can work through this. Please, just give me a chance." I shook my head. "I don't think I can ever look at you the same way again. You've betrayed me in the worst way possible. This isn't something we can fix. It's over." I had thought I would feel angry, but I didn't. Not in the way I expected. Instead, I felt numb. I was done. I had spent so long trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. And now, finally, I was letting go. Jonathan didn't leave immediately. He tried to stay, tried to convince me to give him another chance. But I knew deep down that nothing would ever change. His words were empty, and they were just that, words. I couldn't live like this anymore. couldn't live in this constant cycle of hurt and disappointment. So I stood my ground. I didn't back down. He left that night, and as I watched him go, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't the relief of winning, or the relief of some great victory. It was the relief of finally letting go. But there was also something else. Fear. Fear of what was next. Fear of being alone. But most of all, fear of what I had lost. The silence in the apartment felt deafening after Jonathan left. I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the empty space where he used to be. His things were still scattered around. His shoes by the door, his jacket hanging on the back of the chair, his cologne still lingering in the air. It felt surreal, like I was in a dream I couldn't wake up from. I had kicked him out. I had demanded he leave, and yet I still felt empty, like there was a part of me that was missing. I had finally stood up for myself, finally taken control, and still, it didn't feel like enough. My emotions were all over the place. Anger, sadness, relief, confusion. I kept asking myself why it had taken me so long to get here. Why had I let things go on this far? I spent the next few days in a haze, not really knowing what to do. I told myself I needed time to process everything, but the truth was, I didn't know how to process any of it. My mind kept racing. My thoughts kept circling back to the same thing. How had I missed it? How had I not seen the signs sooner? I tried to focus on work. I buried myself in my job, hoping that the distraction would help. But every time I walked into the office, I felt the weight of what had just happened hanging over me. I felt like everyone could see right through me. Like they could tell I was broken, even though I tried so hard to hide it. I had no one to talk to. My friends had always been supportive of my marriage, and now I didn't know who to turn to. It felt like I had lost everything. My partner, my trust in myself, and even my sense of who I was. I realized how much of my identity had been tied up in Jonathan and our life together. Now I had to figure out who I was without him. But then, just as I was starting to find a rhythm, something happened that I wasn't expecting. It wasn't Jonathan coming back, begging for forgiveness. No, it was something much worse. It was his mother. I had never been close to her. In fact, I had always found her intrusive, overly involved in Jonathan's life, in ways that felt stifling. She was one of those people who believed her son could do no wrong, and I was always the one who had to fit into the mold she created for us. But after the breakup, I had hoped she would stay out of it. I didn't want her to try to fix things. Didn't want her to tell me how much she loved me or how much she missed me, as if nothing had happened. But that's exactly what she did. One evening, just a few days after Jonathan left, I got a text from her. I didn't even want to open it at first. I was so tired of dealing with everyone's expectations and opinions, but curiosity got the best of me. I know things are difficult right now, but you and Jonathan need to talk. He's struggling, and I don't want to see you both throw away what you had. You've always been such a good daughter-in-law, and I think you're making a huge mistake. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't angry at Jonathan for cheating on me. She was angry at me for leaving him. It was as if she couldn't even understand why I'd walked away. I sat there, staring at the text, feeling my anger rise. Who was she to tell me what to do? After everything he had done to me, after everything I had been through, she thought I was the one making a mistake? I felt so many emotions in that moment. Betrayal, frustration, confusion, and this deep, nagging sense of injustice. It felt like everyone in my life was treating me like I was the one in the wrong, like I was the villain for standing up for myself. But that's when something changed inside me. I realized that this wasn't just about Jonathan anymore. It wasn't just about his lies or his betrayal. It was about me and how I had allowed myself to be manipulated and controlled for so long. It was about me finding my voice, taking back my power, and reclaiming my life. I didn't owe anyone anything. Not Jonathan, not his mother, not anyone. I had given everything to that marriage, and now I had to give something back to myself. I didn't owe anyone explanations. I didn't have to justify my actions. I was allowed to walk away. I was allowed to be angry. I was allowed to feel whatever I was feeling. So I typed out my response to his mother. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and wrote, "I appreciate that you're concerned, but this is not your decision to make. Jonathan's actions were his own, and I can't fix what's broken. I need to focus on healing. and I can't do that with him or anyone else trying to tell me what I should be doing. Please respect my choice. It was simple, but it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control again. I hit send, and then I threw the phone down on the couch. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I didn't want to hear any more pleas for me to forgive him or any more judgment from people who didn't understand. I needed time to heal, to be angry, to cry, to figure out what was next. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for that. The next few weeks were a blur of small victories and small defeats. I started to rebuild my life, slowly but surely. I made new routines, did things I hadn't done in years, took walks by myself, started picking up hobbies again, even got back into cooking. It felt like I was learning how to live for myself rather than for anyone else. And while it wasn't easy, it was a start. But even as I made progress, I knew deep down that I wasn't done with this journey yet. There was still a lot of pain to work through, a lot of healing to be done. And I knew that my story with Jonathan wasn't truly over yet. There was still the inevitable confrontation that would come once everything settled. But for now, I had to focus on the present, on me. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The days seemed to blend together. At first, the quiet of my apartment felt suffocating, like I was trapped in a bubble of isolation. But slowly, the silence started to feel like a sanctuary. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations. I could just breathe, and that alone was enough to help me think more clearly. Then, one morning, I received a call that changed everything. It was from Jonathan. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. I had assumed, given how things had ended, that he would leave me alone. But there he was, calling me, his name flashing across my screen. My stomach twisted in knots, but I picked up anyway, feeling that familiar mix of dread and curiosity. "Hey, it's Jonathan." His voice cracked a little, sounding different, smaller, more vulnerable. I just wanted to talk. I need to explain some things. I didn't know what to say at first. I had built so much space between us, so much distance, that hearing his voice felt like a shock to my system. For a moment, I considered hanging up. It would have been so easy, so clean, to just walk away. But something inside me told me I needed to hear him out. I needed to understand where he was coming from, even if it didn't change anything. I took a deep breath before responding. "Explain what, Jonathan? What could you possibly say that would make any of this better?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost feel his hesitation. "I know I've messed up. I know I hurt you. But you have to understand, I didn't mean to. I never wanted to hurt you, I swear." I felt a mix of anger and disbelief rising in my chest. "Really? You didn't mean to. You don't get to say that, Jonathan. You made your choices. You lied, you betrayed me, and now you want me to believe that it wasn't intentional. That's not how this works." His voice grew softer, almost pleading. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but please, just listen. It wasn't what you think. There were things going on with me, things I was struggling with, and I couldn't handle it. I was scared. But that doesn't excuse what I did. I need you to know that I'm sorry." I wanted to believe him. A part of me wanted to believe that he was sorry, that this wasn't just another manipulation tactic. But I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the constant feeling of being dismissed and unimportant. That wasn't something that could be fixed with a few apologies over the phone. "Jonathan," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "I don't need your apology. I don't need you to tell me how sorry you are. What I need is for you to understand that this isn't something I can just forgive and move on from. You broke my trust, and I'm not just going to hand it back to you because you say you're sorry." There was silence again, but this time it wasn't the kind of silence I was used to. It was the kind of silence that felt like a door closing, a finality settling between us. "I get it," he finally said, his voice low. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'll always regret hurting you. I don't want to lose you completely." I sat there, staring at the wall, trying to process his words. A part of me wanted to hold on to the memories, to find a way to make things work. But the other part, the part that had been pushed down and ignored for so long, knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't erase the hurt, the betrayal, the sense of being utterly alone. I think it's better if we don't talk for a while, I said, my voice steady but breaking inside. I need time to figure out what's next for me. I can't keep holding on to something that's already gone. There was another pause, longer this time. Then, he whispered, I understand. I hung up without saying another word, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't closure. No, that would come later. But it was a step in the right direction. I had finally cut the last tie between us. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I threw myself into work even more than before, keeping busy to avoid thinking too much about what had just happened. But even in the midst of my distractions, the reality of my life began to settle in. This was it. This was the new normal. I was no longer Jonathan's wife. I was no longer the woman who had devoted herself to someone who couldn't see her worth. I was someone new, someone who had to rebuild from the ground up. I started making plans for the future. Small things at first. A trip to a place I'd always wanted to visit. A few new hobbies I had been putting off. I also began to rediscover who I was before Jonathan, before the weight of our relationship had changed me. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like wading through a sea of memories, but I knew it was necessary. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. I was walking back from the grocery store when I saw a familiar face, someone I hadn't seen in months. It was Rachel, a close friend from college who had moved away to start her career. She was standing on the sidewalk, holding a coffee cup, smiling as if no time had passed at all. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But Rachel's smile was warm and genuine, and without thinking, I walked over to her. Rachel, I said, still a little unsure. She turned, her face lighting up in recognition. Oh my God, it's you. She pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something. Hope, maybe, like there was a future for me beyond the pain. Hey, it's good to see you, I said, trying to smile through the overwhelming wave of emotions. She looked at me with concern. Are you okay? You look different. I took a deep breath and nodded. I'm getting there. It's been a tough few months, but I'm working through it. Rachel raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story, but she didn't push. Instead, she just nodded. Well, I'm here for you. You're not alone, okay? And just like that, I realized that I wasn't. I had friends, people who cared about me, people who saw me for who I really was. I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's partner. I was me, and that was enough. As we talked, I started to feel the tiniest spark of hope. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe, just maybe, I could move forward, after all. A few weeks passed since that conversation with Jonathan. I had made the decision to step into my new life, but it wasn't an easy journey. There were days when the weight of everything felt unbearable, like I was constantly carrying the ghosts of my past with me. But there were also moments, small moments, when I realized that I was starting to heal. Rachel's return into my life was like a lifeline. Her support, her understanding, and the simple act of having someone who didn't judge me for my past, who just saw me as I was, made a world of difference. She was there for me in ways I didn't even realize I needed, offering advice when I asked for it, and silence when I didn't. Sometimes, just having someone to sit with me while I vented, or to go on long walks with me was all I needed to start letting go of the things that held me down. One evening, as I was sitting in the cozy cafe near my apartment, Rachel and I started talking about the future. It was a topic we had skirted around for a while. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship, or to even think about dating again, but I had to admit that I had started to wonder what my life might look like without the constant shadow of Jonathan over me. So what's next for you? Rachel asked, sipping her coffee and looking at me with that patient, encouraging expression. I put my cup down and thought about it. What was next? The answer didn't come easily. I had spent so many years wrapped up in my marriage that I had forgotten how to dream for myself. But now, I was finally learning to reclaim parts of myself that I'd lost. I was rediscovering my passions, my interests, and even the things I used to enjoy before life got complicated. I think I need to focus on my career, I said slowly. I've been so caught up in everything else that I forgot what I wanted. I'm good at my job, but I haven't pushed myself to be better. I want to take some risks. Maybe go for that promotion I've been avoiding, or start a side project I've been thinking about for years. Something that's just mine. Rachel smiled, proud of me. That sounds perfect. "You're strong, Erica. You're stronger than you realize." It felt good to hear her say that. I'd spent so long doubting my strength, wondering if I could really make it on my own. But here I was, taking steps, however small they seemed, toward rebuilding my life. A few days later, I went to a networking event for professionals in my field. It was something I'd put off for a while, but now I was ready. I walked in, a little nervous but determined. The room was filled with people talking about projects, achievements, and career goals. But for once, I didn't feel out of place. I wasn't Jonathan's wife. I wasn't anyone's second choice. I was Erica, standing on my own 2 feet. I made some connections, chatted with a few people about my work, and even got a couple of leads that could potentially change the course of my career. But more than that, I realized something important. I was capable of more than I'd allowed myself to believe. I had spent so long holding back, thinking that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't deserving of success. But now, I know better. It was enough. I had always had enough. When I got home that night, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was excited about the future. I knew there were challenges ahead, but I also knew I had the strength to face them head on. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments when the past tried to claw its way back into my life, but I was ready. The phone buzzed on my desk, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Jonathan. I stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to open it. The past few weeks had been quiet between us, and I had finally started to feel like I could breathe without him hovering in the background. With a deep breath, I tapped the screen. "I hope you're doing well," the message began. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know things between us are complicated, but I just wanted to check in." I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to respond. Part of me wanted to explain, to ask him how he was doing, to pick up the pieces of our broken past. But then, another part of me, the stronger part, reminded me of why I had made the choice to move on. I didn't owe him anything anymore. I typed a simple response. "I'm doing okay. I think we both need space to figure out what comes next. Take care." I sent it and immediately felt a weight lift off my shoulders. There would be no more emotional back and forth, no more second-guessing myself. I had made my decision. I was moving forward, and I wasn't going to let anything, anyone, drag me back into the past. That night, I fell asleep feeling lighter than I had in a long time. There was a long road ahead of me, but it was my road. I was finally, truly free. And that felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Months had passed since that text to Jonathan. My life had begun to take shape in ways I never imagined possible. The weight of my past was still there, but I had learned how to carry it, no longer letting it define me or control my every step. I'd started saying yes to opportunities that once seemed too big for me, and each time, I grew a little stronger, a little more sure of myself. One evening, I sat at my desk, reviewing some proposals for a new project I was leading. My phone buzzed, and for a moment, I thought it might be another message from Jonathan, but it wasn't. Instead, it was an email from the company I'd been networking with at that event months ago. Subject: Opportunity for new leadership role. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a random connection. It was an offer, a real opportunity to prove what I could do on my own. I'd always been good at my job, but this was something different. This was a chance to lead, to take everything I'd learned over the years and make a real impact. It felt like all my hard work had led to this moment. I took a deep breath, clicking open the email. They wanted to meet with me, discuss the role, and see if I was the right fit. I couldn't believe it. This could be the start of a whole new chapter in my life. A chapter where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. That same night, I found myself talking to Rachel, as usual, processing the news. She could always make me see things clearly when I got overwhelmed. "You've earned this," she said, looking at me with that proud, knowing expression. "You've worked so hard and you're ready for this. No more holding back." Her words hit home. I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago. The girl who once doubted herself, the one who felt like she was always running from the past, had given way to someone stronger, someone who was taking control of her own future. The next few days were a whirlwind. I met with the company, I shared my ideas, and I felt an undeniable spark of excitement with every conversation. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to build something that was completely mine. And as I left the meeting, their offer in hand, I felt like I was standing on the threshold of something incredible. It wasn't just about the career boost. It was about me, about reclaiming my power, about embracing the fact that I deserved all of this. I wasn't simply a survivor of my past. I was a fighter who had made it through the toughest battle of my life and emerged stronger, wiser, and more focused than ever. But even with all this new success, I wasn't delusional enough to think it would be easy. There were still challenges ahead. There would always be remnants of the past, moments when doubt crept in, but I was ready. I had learned how to face them and keep moving forward. There was no turning back. A few weeks later, as I stood in front of my new team for the first time, ready to present the vision I had for the future, I couldn't help but smile. I was standing there, fully present, in control of my life for the first time in years. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady and confident. "This is the start of something exciting, and I'm thrilled to lead this team as we take on new challenges together." It felt right. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something that was just for me, and I knew that no matter what came next, I would be okay. The future was mine to shape, and I had all the tools I needed to build something incredible.